Imagine you're the owner of an ancient sculpture. And imagine if somebody said it was theirs, not yours. And imagine if that someone was the biggest economic power in the world. Recently, there has been a surge in the return of cultural property to China. But why is that? To understand, let us first consider what repatriation actually is.
Art repatriation is the process by which cultural objects are returned to a nation or state at the request of a government.
To help better understand, shall we begin with a family whose name is synonymous with the repatriation debate? The Elgins.
Most people know what happened in the early 19th century, when the 7th Lord Elgin removed a selection of marbles from the Parthenon in Athens. These have become known as the Elgin Marbles. But less well known is the story that took place some half-century later under the supervision of his son, James Bruce, the 8th Lord Elgin. Let's go back to 1860, a time when Britain was about twice as big as China. Well, sort of. It's the climax of the Second Opium War, and in retaliation to the Qing court's mistreatment of European prisoners, the 8th Lord Elgin makes the decision to retaliate with a brutal act, destroying the old summer palace. Known for its splendid gardens, palaces, theaters, and works of art, the old summer palace was the Qing dynasty's personal treasure trove, a celebratory microcosm of Chinese culture. But when Elgin arrived to destroy the gardens, most of the treasures that lay inside were gone. Countless artifacts had been looted by British and French troops, from bronzes and porcelains to silks and furs. They even brought home Britain's first ever Pekingese dog for Queen Victoria, appropriately named Lootie. Looting during conflict is one of the main reasons for cultural relics leaving their original home. At times, the looting is supervised by a commanding authority. Alternatively, looting can be the thievery of foot soldiers and local populations looking to supplement a meager income.
Before we assume the worst of these troops, we must consider historical attitudes towards looting. In her book Art and Cultural Heritage, Barbara T. Hoffman said,
cultural treasures and fine artworks were long considered legitimate spoil for victorious or conquering armies.
Of course, we know things are not the same today, but when did things change?
In 1954, UNESCO introduced the Hague Convention, creating the Blue Shield, a sort of cultural equivalent to the Red Cross. This meant that military forces in war zones are obliged not to destroy or expropriate items of cultural heritage, but also to actively protect it. And if armies go out of their way to do so, they can even get an award. As of February 2014, around 130 countries have signed, so for them, there should be a simple way to ensure repatriation. Before the convention, however, taking spoils of war was generally accepted, and applying its laws retroactively is invalid.
And when artifacts end up in encyclopedic institutions like the British Museum, they're in the public eye, and issues of repatriation become much harder to resolve. But when artifacts do not end up in public museums, they usually find a way home.
The old summer palace in Beijing was built over the course of the 18th century. In China, it's referred to as Yuan, the Garden of Perfect Brightness. Inside this illustrious garden, there once stood a fountain adorned with 12 bronze animal heads, together representing the Chinese zodiac. During the plunder of Yuan, all 12 heads disappeared. One pair in particular, a rabbit and a rat, have lately become somewhat renowned. Over the years, they passed between the hands of private collectors, and eventually reappeared in the collection of French designer Yves Saint Laurent. Upon his death, this collection was auctioned off in Paris, after a French court had ruled that the heads could be sold legally. On the day of the auction in February 2009, a Chinese citizen won the heads for 15.7 million euros each, but refused to pay the sum on moral and patriotic grounds. In response to these events, the Chinese government imposed strict customs regulations on the auction house. So, the CEO of the company that owned the auction house bought the heads for an undisclosed sum and officially returned them to China. There, they were reunited with 5 other previously acquired bronze heads. The location of the remaining 5 is unknown.
Here is China, cradle of civilization in Asia, more than 1/5 of the population of the earth. Like our own America, China is a vast and beautiful country.
China's re-emergence onto the world stage has created a surge in national pride, and this is mirrored in their people's response to their cultural heritage.
In 1949, China had just 25 museums. According to their 5-year plan, it was to have 3,500 museums by 2015, a target it achieved 3 years early.
And China is determined to see works of art repatriated in order to fulfill this demand.
But that determination is not exclusive to China. Remember those marbles that Elgin's dad took from the Parthenon? Well, Greece is hardly short of determination to see them returned. There are protests, lawsuits. They even made a film about it. So, what makes China's case different? Firstly, in the midst of rising nationalism and economic prosperity, the government and newly rich are increasingly buying back Chinese artifacts when they appear at auction. The government also appointed an ambassador for the return of cultural relics to the old summer palace, none other than the famous art scholar, Jackie Chan. Okay, so not an art scholar, but a huge celebrity, and maybe that's better. It's all part of what keeps Chinese art repatriation firmly in the headlines. Oh yeah, and they made a film about it. But there is another aspect to Chinese repatriation. Their determination to get their artwork back is now met by a widespread resolve to give it back. Casino magnate Steve Yuan, for example, donated a Ming vase to the Macau Museum in China in 2006. The South China Morning Post wrote, "Not many men would willingly shell out $10 million of their own money for a 600-year-old Ming vase and immediately give it away." Well, that's true, unless you're a man who's about to open China's first ever Las Vegas-style resort, complete with a golden zodiac cupola featuring, of course, a rabbit and a rat. More recently, France organized the repatriation of a collection of ancient solid gold plaques to China. Perhaps the government wished to return the objects in time for the French foreign minister to visit Beijing and celebrate the 50th anniversary of French-Chinese diplomatic relations. One thing that we can say for sure is that alongside an economic resurgence, China is seeing an artistic resurgence too. And for those in the art world, repatriating works of art to China may be a surefire way to secure a place in China's emerging art scene.